At 56, Phil Mickelson just made a huge decision about his future. This isn't clickbait, it is a full-scale disappearance from the sport he dominated for 3 decades. The 6-time major champion has vanished from the biggest stages, ending a streak that lasted 36 years. And honestly, the sheer silence from this Hall of Famer is genuinely frustrating. Regular working-class fans are grinding through their weeks, yet this country club legend is ghosting the tournaments that made him famous because of vague family excuses, while his name gets quietly scrubbed from private club rosters across San Diego. It is a shocking fall from grace that proves even golf's most beloved icons can burn every bridge they built if they take the wrong check. But look past the outrage. Phil Mickelson isn't just hiding from the spotlight, he is trapped inside one. He realized too late that the LIV experiment is financially imploding, the PGA Tour will never welcome him back, and the Champions Tour is a locked door he cannot open. It is a golden cage designed to shift all the blame onto him, while the suits who signed his checks walk away clean. Let me show you exactly how the most popular player of his generation ended up with absolutely nowhere to go. Personally, this is the saddest ending to a golf legend I have ever witnessed. Do you blame Phil for taking the money, or the tour for pushing him out? Tell me below. And if real stories about golf's biggest falls and rises are what you are here for, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's get into what that decision actually meant. But here is the thing, we do not actually know the full story yet. That is what makes this so fascinating and so frustrating. Phil Mickelson did not hold a press conference. He did not release a heartfelt video. He did not say goodbye to the fans who followed him for 30 years. Instead, he simply started to fade. The calendar turned to 2026, and the golf world began to notice something strange. Phil's name was missing from entry lists. His schedule, which was usually mapped out months in advance, was completely blank. The rumors started to swirl in the locker rooms, in the media centers, and across social media. Something was clearly wrong, but nobody seemed to have the full picture. The fans were left guessing, the journalists were left chasing shadows, and Phil Mickelson, the man who had always been so open, so accessible, so willing to give a quote or crack a joke, had gone completely silent. That silence is the loudest thing about this entire situation. For a man who built his brand on being the people's champion, the guy who would sign autographs for hours and chat with anyone who approached him, the radio silence is absolutely deafening, and that silence has created a vacuum, a space where speculation runs wild, and the truth is buried under layers of rumor and half-truth. The silence from the Hall of Famer is deafening. But the real question is not what he did, it is why he felt he had no choice but to disappear. Think about what it takes for a player of his stature to go quiet like this. Phil Mickelson has been in the public eye since he was a teenager. He was the kid who won the NCAA championship, the amateur who nearly won the US Open at Shinnecock in 1995, the golfer who was always compared to Tiger Woods and always handled the comparison with grace and humor. He has given thousands of interviews over his career. He has been the subject of countless articles, documentaries, and biographies. He has never been shy about sharing his opinions, even when they were controversial. So for him to go completely silent, to stop talking to the media, to stop posting on social media, to stop showing up at the events that made him famous, is not just unusual. It is unprecedented. It is a sign that something deeply wrong is happening behind the scenes. The first hints came early in the year. Phil released a statement saying he would miss the first 2 LIV events because of a family health issue involving his wife Amy. That sounded reasonable enough. Families face health crises. Golf takes a back seat. The fans understood, or at least they pretended to. They sent their well wishes, offered their support, and waited for him to return. But the weeks turned into months, and the return never came. Spring arrived, and Phil was still absent. Summer came, and his schedule remained empty. The official explanation started to look less like the whole story and more like a cover, a convenient excuse that would buy him time while something else played out behind the scenes. The health scare explained his absence from a few events. It does not explain why his name vanished from the clubhouses he used to own. The health scare explained his spring. It does not explain why his name vanished from the clubhouses he used to own. Let me tell you about those clubhouses, because that is where the real story starts to take shape. Phil Mickelson grew up in San Diego, He learned to play golf on the courses there, built his reputation there, and maintained deep roots in that community for his entire adult life. The Farms Golf Club was one of his home bases. It was a place where he belonged, a place where the staff knew him, where members respected him, and where he could escape the noise of the professional tour. That changed in 2026. According to multiple reports, Phil was effectively expelled from the Farms following allegations of inappropriate physical contact with a female staff member. His lawyer, Tom Clare, pushed back hard. Clare stated that the accusations were refuted by video evidence and that his client had done nothing wrong. But the expulsion still happened. The club still cut ties. And it did not stop there. At least 3 other San Diego area golf clubs also distanced themselves from him, severing relationships that had lasted for years. Think about what that means for a moment. This is a man who has won 45 times on the PGA Tour, a man who has been celebrated as one of the most beloved figures in the history of the game, and he was being quietly uninvited from the places where he learned to play. The local courses that should have been his sanctuary were now closing their doors. There is something deeply humiliating about that, something that goes beyond just losing a membership. It is a public rejection from his own community, a sign that the people who knew him best no longer wanted him around. And when a player of Phil's stature faces that kind of rejection, it does not just hurt his pride. It damages his reputation, his legacy, and his sense of belonging. The golf world is a small community. Word travels fast. And when the clubs in your hometown start cutting ties, everyone else takes notice. Being banned from his local courses was a warning shot. The real threat was still waiting on the horizon, and it was much bigger than any golf club in San Diego. The threat is the financial foundation of his entire career. You see, Phil did not just stay on the PGA Tour like most of his peers. He made a different choice. A choice that seemed brilliant at the time, but is now looking like a massive gamble. He joined LIV Golf, the Saudi-backed league that promised to revolutionize the sport with unlimited money and a new format. The contract was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the kind of money that made his head spin, the kind of money that could secure his family's future for generations. But that money came with a price. It required him to burn his bridges with the PGA Tour, to walk away from the organization that made him a star, and to align himself with a rival that was determined to tear down the establishment. At the time, it looked like a brilliant power move. Phil was getting paid, sticking it to the old guard, and securing his legacy on his own terms. But now, the league that paid him billions is starting to show cracks. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, the entity that bankrolled the entire operation, announced that it would stop funding LIV after the 2026 season. That announcement sent shockwaves through the entire ecosystem because LIV had been built on the promise of endless cash. Players like Phil signed contracts betting that the league would not just survive but thrive. That bet is now looking like a losing one. There are rumors of bankruptcy filings. There are reports that LIV is scrambling to find new investors and coming up empty. The league is not dead yet, but it is on life support. And if LIV collapses, Phil does not just lose his paycheck. He loses his entire competitive home. He has nowhere else to go. The league is crumbling, and the money is drying up. The real question now is what happens to Phil when the last pillar of his support finally gives way. Now, consider the irony of that situation. Phil Mickelson left the PGA Tour because he felt undervalued. He felt that the tour was not paying its players enough, that the old guard was holding back progress, and that he deserved better. So he took the Saudi money, signed the massive contract, and became the face of a rival league. He was the poster boy for LIV Golf, the one player who could credibly challenge the PGA Tour's dominance. And for a while, it worked. He was getting paid, he was playing in new events, and he was sticking it to the establishment. But now, the establishment is still standing, and LIV is crumbling. The PGA Tour has survived the challenge, adapted to the competition, and emerged stronger than before. Meanwhile, Phil is facing the very real possibility that his new home is about to disappear. He bet on the wrong horse, and now the consequences are catching up with him. That is the cruelest irony of all. He left the PGA Tour because he thought he was too big for it, and now he is facing the possibility that he is too big for anything else. There is nowhere left that wants him, nowhere left that can pay him, and nowhere left that will welcome him back with open arms. Alan Shipnuck is the man who wrote the definitive biography on Phil Mickelson. He knows the player better than almost anyone outside of Phil's inner circle. Shipnuck spoke about the situation on The Rich Eisen Show, and his words cut straight to the heart of the matter. He said that if LIV disappears, Phil becomes a man without a country. He has no tour to call his own. He has no guaranteed starts. He has no safety net. Shipnuck painted the big picture in stark, unflinching terms. But the most painful detail actually came from someone much closer to Phil, from a teammate who still shares a locker room with his ghost. Shipnuck painted the big picture, but the most painful detail came from the teammate who still shares a locker room with his ghost. Brendan Steele was Phil's teammate on the HyFlyers GC, the LIV squad that Phil captained. Steele spoke publicly in August 2026 about the situation, and his words carried a tone that was impossible to miss. He said, and I quote, "We wish him well. We hope he is happy and healthy." That sounds like a kind sentiment on the surface. But listen to the tense. Listen to the distance. Steele did not say we are getting ready for his return. He did not say we cannot wait to have him back. He spoke about Phil in a way that suggested his captain is not coming back. That is the sound of abandonment. That is the sound of a man being left behind by his own team, not because they want to, but because he has drifted so far away that they can no longer reach him. The locker room is closing the door on him. But even if they wanted him back, there are other doors that have been welded shut permanently. The locker room is closing the door on him. But even if they wanted him back, there are other doors that have been welded shut permanently. The PGA Tour is the most obvious destination for any golfer trying to return to relevance. It is the biggest stage, the toughest competition, and the most prestigious title in the sport. Phil Mickelson knows that better than almost anyone. He won 45 tournaments there, including 5 majors. But the PGA Tour is not exactly rolling out a welcome mat. Under the new leadership of Brian Rolapp, who came over from the NFL to reshape the tour's future, the organization has been tightening its grip on players who defected to LIV. Rolapp has made it clear that returning players will face significant penalties, including a 1-year suspension and a hefty fine that runs into the millions of dollars. That is the official policy. But the unofficial reality is even harsher. There are people in positions of power who have not forgotten what Phil said about them. There are board members who remember his comments from 2022, when he called the PGA Tour a sinking ship and openly mocked its leadership. They have not forgiven him for taking the Saudi money and trying to tear down the institution that made him a star. The PGA Tour is a fortress. Even if Phil pays the fines and serves the suspension, there is a human element at play that no amount of money can fix. The decision makers simply do not want him back. The PGA is a locked fortress. But what about the other path? The one that should be a natural retirement home for a player his age. The Champions Tour is the senior circuit, the place where legends go to compete against their peers in a less physically demanding environment. Phil Mickelson turned 56 in 2026, which puts him firmly in the target demographic for that tour. He could have coasted into those events, played limited schedules, collected healthy appearance fees, and basked in the adoration of fans who grew up watching him win. But here is the problem. The Champions Tour is administered by the PGA Tour. It is the same organization, the same leadership, and the same collective memory. And Phil burned that bridge just as thoroughly as he burned the main tour. He did not just leave the PGA Tour, he actively mocked its leadership on his way out. He insulted its business model and publicly aligned himself with a rival league that tried to destroy it. The players who stayed loyal, the veterans who kept their heads down and rode out the storm, are the ones who get the invitations now. They are the ones who get the sponsor exemptions and the ceremonial tee times. Phil Mickelson, for all his accomplishments, is not welcome among them. Every door is slammed. Every bridge is ash. It makes you wonder how the man standing on top of the world just 5 years ago ended up in this abyss. Think about what that means for a player of his stature. Phil Mickelson has won 45 times on the PGA Tour. He has won 6 major championships. He has been one of the most recognizable figures in the sport for 3 decades. He has earned hundreds of millions of dollars on the course and millions more off it. And yet, at 56 years old, He has nowhere to go. He is a Hall of Famer without a tour, a legend without a league, and a champion without a championship to chase. That is not just a fall from grace. That is a complete and total collapse of everything he built. And the saddest part is that he did it to himself. Nobody forced him to join LIV. Nobody forced him to insult the PGA Tour. Nobody forced him to burn his bridges. He made those choices, and now he is living with the consequences. But that does not make it any less painful to watch. For fans who grew up cheering for him, who remember his victories, his smiles, and his signature fist pumps, watching him fade away like this is heartbreaking. It is like watching a great athlete stay on the field too long, except in this case, he was not pushed off the field by age or injury. He was pushed off the field by his own decisions. 5 years ago, Phil Mickelson was on top of the world. The 2021 PGA Championship at Kiawah Island was one of the most stunning victories in the history of the sport. At 50 years old, he became the oldest major champion ever, outlasting a field full of players young enough to be his sons. He hit one brilliant shot after another, stared down the pressure, and proved that age was just a number. The crowd at Kiawah roared for him like he was Tiger Woods in his prime. They lifted him up, celebrated him, and reminded him that he was still one of the most beloved figures in golf. That was the peak. That was the moment when Phil Mickelson could have walked away, retired as a legend, and spent the rest of his life being celebrated at every tournament he ever attended. But he did not walk away. He took the LIV money instead. He signed the contract, joined the rival league, and made himself an enemy of the establishment. The cheers at Kiawah are a distant echo. Now the only voices left are the analysts writing the final chapter of his career. The cheers at Kiawah are a distant echo. Now the only voices left are the analysts writing the final chapter of his career. One of those analysts is Mark Allen, a former PGA Tour professional who has watched Phil's career from the inside. Allen offered a brutally honest assessment of where things stand now. He said he thinks Phil will struggle to play at a high level again, and he called the whole situation a sad ending. That word, sad, is the one that sticks. It is not angry. It is not vengeful. It is just sad. A man who gave the sport 30 years of unforgettable moments has been reduced to a cautionary tale. His own choices backed him into a corner, and now that corner is getting tighter by the day. The huge decision that the title promised, the one that viewers wanted to understand, was not a retirement announcement or a comeback plan. It was a decision Phil made years ago, when he signed that contract and traded his legacy for a paycheck. This 2026 disappearance is merely the consequence, the final bill coming due after years of ignoring the warnings. So what does the future actually hold for Phil Mickelson? What does a man without a country, without a tour, and without a home course do next? He plays exhibition matches. He shows up for corporate outings where the appearance fee is still fat, but the competition is hollow. He becomes a ceremonial figure, the kind of player who gets introduced as a legend but never really competes. He will hit balls at charity events, sign autographs for rich sponsors, and live off the memory of what he used to be. The sport has moved on without him. The fans have started to forget. And at 56, Phil Mickelson is learning the hardest lesson in professional golf. The money is not permanent. The contracts are not forever. And when you burn every bridge, you end up standing on an island all by yourself. There is a certain poetry to that image. Phil Mickelson standing alone on an island, surrounded by water, with no way to reach the shore. It is a fitting metaphor for his current situation. He built his career on risk-taking, on aggressive play, and on believing that he could pull off the impossible. That approach won him 6 majors and 45 tour victories. It also earned him the love of millions of fans. But that same approach, that willingness to take big risks, is what led him to this point. He took a massive gamble on LIV Golf, and he lost. He gambled that the league would survive, that the money would keep flowing, and that the PGA Tour would eventually welcome him back. He was wrong on all counts, and now he is paying the price. It is a cautionary tale for every young golfer watching, every player who dreams of greatness. The game will reward you, but it will also punish you. The fans will love you, but they will also forget you. And the money that seems so important today will mean nothing when you have nowhere to play and no one to play against. Phil Mickelson is not the first great athlete to fall from grace, and he will not be the last. But his fall is particularly painful because of how high he climbed and how hard he crashed. He was one of the best to ever play the game, and now he is a ghost, haunting the sport he once ruled.